This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and I'm going to do a review now of the Dark Side of the Ring Plane Ride from Hell documentary. I've put the links in the description of Terry Runnels and Justin Credible talking about this to me in the past. Shawn Stasiak, who at one point was managed by Terry Runnels in WWE when he was Meat, was also on the Plane Ride from Hell. And tonight, Sunday night, September 19th, 2021 at 9 p.m. Eastern, he's actually going to do an interview with me about his experiences on the Plane Ride from Hell, which he hasn't talked about publicly ever. There's a couple things. Dave Meltzer says that Vince McMahon was actually not on this flight. From people he talked to around the time that this report came out, including apparently Jonathan Coachman said that. So Terry Runnels, you have to kind of question her credibility a little bit, saying that Vince was on the flight, because it seems like if Vince was on the flight, it wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. And I do like Terry Runnels. She was nice doing her interview with me, but there was something off in her interview with me. You fans can watch it yourself. She may or may not have been under the influence of something. I don't know. But it was a bit of an unusual interview. And for anyone that remembers, it wasn't too long ago that she was actually caught with a gun in, I believe it was the Tampa airport. So I'm not saying what she's saying isn't true, but it does seem weird that if Meltzer says he reported on this when it happened, and from the people he talked to, the more credible one said Vince wasn't on the flight, it is very possible Vince wasn't on the flight, because it seems odd that he would just ignore everything happening if he was indeed on the flight. When one of the things Terry Runnels discussed was the story about at the pay-per-view before this, Brock Lesnar revealing himself to her. We do know that he likes older women. He did end up marrying Sable, so she could very well be telling the truth there. It is hearsay, and as she said, she didn't speak up about it at the time, and I guess he was in the locker room. I'd have to interview her again and ask more details of that, but whenever you have male and women in the same locker room area, unfortunately, things like that sometimes happen. Terry Runnels, of course, used to be married to Dustin Rhodes, dated Brian Pillman, dated New Jack for a period of time. And there's rumors she was with other wrestlers as well. One thing that's interesting is they talked about Dustin Rhodes singing on the speakers of the airplane to Terry when he was out of it. One thing they didn't mention, where they did mention about Ric Flair and Scott Hall, their alleged sexual harassment to the flight attendant, but they didn't mention something that was brought up in the court documents related to this. If you look at section G, it said defendant Runnels grabbed plaintiff Capitano's, whatever it is, arm repeatedly, asked her if her breasts were real, and said, quote, "You and me are gonna fuck," end quote, and grabbed her rear and rubbed his groin into her. So they kind of gave Dustin Rhodes a pass on the touching and explicit comments to the flight attendants, where they went full out on Ric Flair and Scott Hall's alleged sexual harassment of the flight attendant. The flight attendant I mean, I don't know if this was a criminal or civil action. That part wasn't clear. If she felt so strongly about this, it's unfortunate she didn't press civil or criminal charges to the full extent. She chose to settle it. So that was her choice. She can say her husband played a factor and other things, but it was ultimately her choice to not press charges. So that's unfortunate. She clearly did not have a good flight. She clearly did not have a good flight. And I sympathize with her for everything she went through on that flight. One thing I will say in Tommy Dreamer's defense, he did not come off well in this. I understand where all of his heat is from now that I've actually watched it. But one thing I will say is Tommy Dreamer very likely did not see her testimony before he was asked about Ric Flair doing his routine where he's naked under a robe. This has been well documented in books and shoot interviews. This was something Ric Flair has done all of his career, and Bruno Sammartino has actually gone on the record saying it was one of the reasons why Bruno didn't think Ric Flair was the greatest champion because of his habit of getting naked in public. He didn't think that that was the way a champion should act. I've heard him talk about that when he was still alive. Now, the confusion where Tommy Dreamer was is this flight attendant is saying that Ric Flair was trying to get her to actually grab his dick when he was swinging the dick around in front of her, where it seems like Tommy Dreamer was under the impression that this was his general behavior of getting naked and swinging his dick around like a helicopter. I've heard it many, many times, the same story. And I guess one of his sayings is straight and to the left or something, because I guess his dick curves to the left or something. So that's one of his sayings that he talks about when he's drunk. So it is bizarre. It does make me wonder, though, was AEW aware of this? We know that AEW works with, they use a lot of AEW talent on these Dark Side of the Ring documentaries, and a lot of the time I've found there's bias towards AEW. Did the producers let Tony Khan know that they were kind of going to go after Ric Flair in this? And maybe was that the reason why Ric Flair did not appear in AEW yet? And was WWE aware that this documentary was going to come out when Ric Flair and WWE had their mutual parting of ways? That's a question that I wonder, because if WWE had suspected something like this was going to come out of about Ric Flair, I could see why they would want to remove him from their ambassadors, because I believe, from what I understand, he was getting paid a large amount of money to be like a brand ambassador, and also, of course, he was still being used on TV. And a lot of people were shocked when they let Flair go, because he had said when he had initially signed that contract that he was going to be with WWE for the foreseeable future. And Tony Khan had even said he wasn't even going to try and sign Flair because of his relationship with WWE. And then, obviously, if this had come out while he was still under the roster of WWE, I mean, Impact has indefinitely suspended Tommy Dreamer, and all he did was stick up for Ric Flair, when I'm almost positive Tommy Dreamer probably did not hear this flight attendant's testimony. I'm sure he would have used different words had he actually heard her testimony, because he may have been thinking in his head that this is just Ric Flair happily dancing around, swinging his dick around, where she is alleging that he was acting. I'm not saying that that was appropriate. That's definitely unusual behavior, but to actually be telling a flight attendant while you're naked to grab your dick, if that was happening and Dreamer heard her testimony before being asked about it, maybe he would have said something different. I don't know. The other things that happened on that flight, Brock Lesnar and Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, got into a scuffle on the plane where apparently they hit the emergency exit door, which, of course, they clarified during this that it'd be very unlikely that it could open. However, banging into stuff at their size, they're both 6'4", 280-ish pounds. They could have done something that would have screwed up the pressure and caused an emergency landing while they were still over the ocean, and people could have died. So that was getting out of hand. At one point, Michael P.S. Hayes, who has a history of crazy behavior, but WWE, he's kind of immune to WWE's firings for whatever reason. Kurt Hennig was fired over that thing with Lesnar. Lesnar was not fired because he was young and they saw more potential in him. Where, from what I remember, around that time, Hennig was basically being used to put talent over, from what I recall. And then, the Michael P.S. Hayes punched Bradshaw, who had fresh cuts on his forehead. So it made the cuts bleed. And then Bradshaw slapped him and knocked him out. So I can understand why the flight attendants would definitely be panicking when all this stuff is happening with these massive men. And of course, X-Pac, who's a prankster, he's known for shitting in people's bags like he did to Mark Mero and Sable, shitting in Sonny's lunch, and I guess he cut off. He did that at other times, but at this time he cut off Michael Hayes' ponytail. And then I guess they taped it up in the locker room the next night. I can't remember if X-Pac was fired over this or not. I really don't recall. But a lot of stuff went down, a lot of drunken, crazy behavior. I'm interested to hear Shawn's version of it because he was talking to me about this yesterday. And without going into too much detail, he was saying he didn't notice it was as bad as it was, but he certainly remembers some crazy stuff going on that flight, but he said it was an enjoyable flight for him. So that it was this one, I guess, was the first Dark Side of the Ring where people have actually been punished from it. Ric Flair's had an ad campaign canceled, apparently, because of this, and Tommy Dreamer has been suspended from whatever his job was at Impact, which I don't know if he was an executive, his pay may have been decent, but I know wrestlers' pay for Impact in general isn't very good. So bad situation. And for the people that are saying this is old news, why is this all coming out now? This isn't relevant. Stop talking about stuff that happened 20 years ago. Well, only the smart marks really knew about this, and people that follow shoot interviews. And from what I understand, Vice has an actual TV show, and in Canada it airs on Crave TV, which is a Netflix type thing. So it is bringing this out to a new audience where wrestling fans might find this type of behavior more normal reading the books over the years. But when you reach new people, it can be kind of shocking. And with how tame wrestling is today overall, especially in WWE, this is kind of crazy stuff. Like, times have changed. I mean, not too long ago, 25, 30 years ago, Paul Orndorff allegedly beat up Big Van Vader, who was a top star in WCW, and Orndorff was an agent. Could you imagine a WWE agent today, like Abyss, beating up Roman Reigns? And then Roman Reigns getting fired because WCW kept the agent and fired the top talent, which was Vader. Times have changed. I'll get into some of your questions, but yeah, this was overall. I haven't liked the season of 2021 of Dark Side of the Ring, but this one was an interesting one for sure. Because we hadn't heard that side of the flight attendants version of it, because they never, I don't know if she had signed a non-disclosure or if just no one ever asked her about it, or if the non-disclosure agreement involved with the settlement expired or what, or she just doesn't care anymore. But now her side came out. Mad Hop doesn't care about Ric Flair's dick being out. Wayne says, good morning. One of our Great North Wrestling fans from the Ottawa Valley. Fly Guy said she didn't have to sign the non-disclosure. Well, I just find it interesting that WWE would pay a settlement and not have her sign a non-disclosure, because usually the whole point of settling something is to keep it quiet. So I don't know where you're getting your information from, Fly Guy. I really don't. I haven't. I'd have to do more research into that, but to be honest, I don't care that much about the story. I'm going to talk to Shawn later today, but my interest in it is very little. Mitch Seinfeld, maybe a different flight attendant. Not sure what you mean there. Sofa King, wasn't this a court case that was already resolved? If you mean by resolved, by settled, yes. And that's what I find interesting, because usually when a court case is settled, there's agreements where you can't talk about it. So it is strange that this is all coming up. And even with this that I put up earlier from the original court files, this is all hearsay because it was never proven in court due to the settlement, because it didn't go to court because they settled. Mitch Seinfeld said this flight attendant probably got a big payoff. There was probably a lot. I would like to know what the payoffs were to keep this quiet for so long. Andre, I have no idea. I think the WWE would have probably not wanted that whole situation to go to court. Jim Ross said in this that the reason Ric Flair wasn't fired was probably because of everything he's done. I'm not quoting him. I forget what the exact quote was, but it was because of Flair's position with the company. But it had that a whole mess gone to court and all that dirty laundry have been aired, there would have been probably the match between Flair and Shawn Michaels at that WrestleMania would never have happened. Fly Guy says she hopes that the flight attendant doesn't have to pay the money back because she spoke about it. Who knows? Scary Harry doesn't know why he's awake. It's 5 a.m. here. I'm a vampire. I'm a creature of the night. I prefer to be up at night. Doing the old 420 review. After running 11 miles and working out earlier today, McGrannon, crazy things happen when wrestlers make European trips. They do. They do. I'm going to talk about it in my book, but I have my own experiences in Europe as I drink my sparkling water. The grind and the travel can make people snap, and then you throw alcohol, and as they talked about in this, they were all taking pills and all this crap too. So there was a lot of crazy stuff. And for a while, WWE stopped testing for steroids. They only started it again, from what I understand, after the Chris Benoit murder suicides. So a lot of these guys were probably juiced up too. Not that they can't take TRT now, but they need a prescription for it, from my understanding, unless you're a part-timer who have special contracts. Charles says, no matter what is thought today, it would be just considered him being the man back then. I don't know. You know what? I do think it's cool that all the women he was allegedly with, but I don't think a guy dancing around naked is that cool as a man. Girls dancing around naked that are hot, sure, but I don't think that a man dancing around naked is necessarily cool. The Oz, well, Tommy Dreamer is probably in his 50s now, and he had a long career. I don't think it matters too much for him in the end. He can still do indie bookings. So, yeah. Anyways, someone brought up the emergency door. If that opened, it would have been a huge amount of pandemonium. Apparently, because of the pressure, it couldn't have opened. I'm no pilot, though. Brian says, at least the cool people had fun. Had that one guy in the group got naked. Everyone has that one guy in the group that gets naked at parties. I mean, I've taken my shirt off a lot at parties and in bars. But to my knowledge, not my pants. Mark, he's a smart man. He can say, he can confirm through pilots, friends of his, it would have been impossible for the door to open mid-flight. Williams says Jonathan Coachman confirms Vince was not on the plane. Everyone else says he was. Well, Meltzer said he talked to other people at the time that says Vince wasn't. I don't know if Jim Ross was never quoted, from what I recall, in this being on the plane. I can't imagine in a million years, if it got as bad as it got, that Vince McMahon would have just ignored it completely. I could be wrong, but I just can't see that happening if it got that bad, unless Vince was totally passed out. Agent Orange says alcohol is a problem and solution to all life's problems. You know what? I'm a big supporter of weed, which is legal here in Canada. If you get enough alcohol in me, I'll be really crazy. If you get enough weed in you, you'll just go to sleep. That's a fact. And I've been a bouncer for nearly 20 years, nearly 2 decades I was bouncing. And I can tell you, I'd rather deal with people that have been on weed. They don't cause problems. Alcohol can make people legitimately crazy. We'll end it at the 420 comment. There's other comments, but I'm not an expert in this. I feel bad for the flight attendants. This is a big mess. Ric Flair, I don't think this will matter in the long run for his career, whether in his 70s he's temporarily blackballed or not. His career stands on its own. And someone else here is talking about Dreamer's old school mentality. And as I said, I don't think Dreamer actually heard this woman's testimony. I think if he had heard her testimony and not just assumed it was the dancing that she was offended by, maybe it would be different. But again, I'm not in Dreamer's head. I barely know Dreamer. I've only met him a handful of times. In my dealings with him, he was easy to deal with him. But I did beat him. Not only did I beat him, I made him submit. And you can look that match up here on the Hannibal TV. And my God, that was 11 years ago. Time flies.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our